Mark Bryan Wilson puppeteered Slimer in the blockbuster film Ghostbusters. His other credits include puppetry work on Beetlejuice, Hook, MuppetVision 3D, and the Mr. Potato Head Show, to name just a few. I talked to Mark Bryan Wilson about his work on these projects and much more on this episode of Under the Puppet. You're listening to Saturday Morning Media. And now, back to our show. Welcome to the show that talks to puppeteers about the art and business of puppetry. My name is Grandpa Choco, and this is Under the Puppet. Well, Mark Bryan Wilson, thank you so much for being on Under the Puppet.
Hey, Grant, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate you, and I can't wait to talk some more about puppetry.
I heard you say that you discovered puppetry at a very young age. Is that true?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, when I was in elementary school, they had marionette shows that came by every other year. So I'd wait for the flyers. Of course, I was like in kindergarten when I saw the first one, and it was a proscenium-based marionette show. Puppets weren't very big, probably about 18 inches tall, and it was a lit show with a soundtrack that was played, and the marionettes were performed to the soundtrack. And I think the first one I saw was Rumpelstiltskin. The other ones I saw was Snow White and Peter Pan. But the first show, this was all new to me. I'd seen some puppets on TV, but this was live. It was right there in the school auditorium, so or the cafetorium or whatever it was. Yeah. So all of us little kids were there, and we got to see a fairy tale come to life with the lights and shadows and sounds and beautiful marionettes. And what really caught me is at the end of the performance, the puppeteers invited us to come up on stage. Of course, we're 5 years old, so we all had to have a partner. And we went up 2 by 2 up the steps, and behind the stage where we got to see all of the puppets and props. That was it. I was hooked. I saw that there was several versions of particular characters where they were dressed in different outfits so that they could bring the marionettes on and do a costume change without dressing a marionette. So when I saw that, and for Snow White, I think there was like a little jeweled cart. And I thought, wow, I know those rhinestones. I've seen those at our craft store. So immediately I got my mom to take me off, and we bought a little bag of rhinestones, and I built a little cardboard mining cart like the dwarves had one year. And so I thought, all of a sudden it was like, oh, I see that, I see that, I see that. And then I was able to add those and to begin looking around for books, mainly is how I started, books from the elementary school library on how to build a simple puppet. But as soon as I went behind and I saw all the magic, behind the scenes, I was bit. And I still am very passionate about puppetry and what a character that is an inanimate object, when you add life to it by moving it around and giving it a voice and stuff. I was inspired by that first magic that I saw, and then I've been trying to add to that ever since.
Now, you mentioned your mom took you to the craft store to buy the rhinestones. Growing up, were your parents like very creative, and so they were totally into it?
Of course, my parents were trying to raise 3 kids, so they were pretty busy doing that. Mom was a full-time housewife, and she took it very seriously, making sure that we were raised well. And Dad was a little bit more crafty, but Mom also had her talents at the sewing machine. And my dad was a woodworker on the weekends, but also Dad would bring home hobby things. And that's, I think, was one of the things I really enjoyed as a little kid, is Dad would come home with a cardboard box and said, hey, I'm an electrical contractor, and the guy gave me, since we put in a big order, this kit of fiber optics. And I was like, ooh, fiber optics, what can we do with those? Also, we did things like the cellophane leaves around a wire frame where you'd kind of dip them. And so Dad was always bringing home these different things. Also, with his woodworking, when it came time to build marionettes, he helped me to learn how to use the tools safely. For quite a few years, I was his assistant. So I would hang on to the end of the plyboard or whatever when he was cutting a full sheet, and he would talk me through it and teach me. So both my parents and then my sister and brother also assisted from time to time. My sister would help me on the sewing machine and help me when the thread would break or whatever. And my brother was into building military miniatures at that point. So he was building tanks and airplanes. And so he had the airbrush. All of this stuff to me was magic. And of course, when I first discovered it, I was too young. It's like, oh, the airbrush, it's very delicate, Mark. When you get older, you can take that and you can use it, but not now. So, there was all these things that were kind of, at grasp, and I could see them and watch them being used. So I had to, as a child, be almost like an apprentice. But I had a very supportive family, and my dad even built my first marionette stage, I guess, when I was about 10 years old. So there was, always some support there. And, but I was the one running full guns towards building more puppets and learning more about it and finding books and stuff.
Yeah. Do you still have any of those early puppets?
I just unearthed my marionette I built from high school. I keep hoping that I'll come across maybe even some that I had done for projects in elementary. And I don't even know that I have any photographs. It was that kind of like, when film was precious and you had 12 exposures on a roll, some things just didn't get documented to where now I'll shoot, 50 exposures just on one pose and then pick the absolute best with the digital medium. But I really, I have, I guess he would be like a Arab salesperson, an Arab sheik, I think I used to call him. So I built him in high school. And I already had built 3 or 4 marionettes by then. So I did a paper mache head over a clay sculpture, and then I removed the clay and put the head back together and did wood and screw eyes for the bodies and dowels for the arms. Very simple. Hands were carved very rudimentarily. And looking at them now, it's like, well, that's when I was trying to figure out how to just basically round a finger. And if you've got a block, how you cut a groove in so that it goes down the center and doesn't go off one way or the other. So it's kind of fun to dig him back out. I actually gave him a little TLC and ironed his costume and replaced a couple of broken strings. Unfortunately, he had a great big horse because he was probably, I think he's 22 inches tall. So the horse was about 30 inches from nose to tail. And at some point, I had decided that it was just too big to store. I was actually going to pull it apart and rebuild it. But I have at least that one. And it's really fun to see because since then, I've spent about another 40 years building puppets and all the lessons I've learned.
Yeah. Do you ever think about rebuilding it now, like, the same puppet, but now with your skills now?
Oh, sure. Yeah, because I looked at it, and as we did a little video filming on the iPhone so that I could send it off for somebody who was doing a blog. And I looked at his eyes, and his eyes don't focus down, they focus up. So it's like, ooh, I'd redo the eyes, and those are just painted on the paper mache. So I'd probably put glass eyes in. Most likely I'd do some kind of a resin or fiberglass, something that would just last forever. But yeah, it would be fun to revisit that. I was, had thought about possibly redoing his horse or some kind of an animal character, and then possibly putting him on video. But yeah, it's fun to look at those first projects. And, to me, a screw eye with a screw eye where you would open one up and stick it on the other was a magical joint. I mean, that was really pretty amazing. But since then, I've learned that, string and cord, like cord from sashes, I think they call it sash cord, is quiet and very flexible and moves every direction just like a screw eye was. But I think in the first couple of Encyclopedia Britannicas or something had a picture, and their joints were screw eyes. So to me, that it opened a world, and I bought a bag of screw eyes. Unfortunately, as a little kid, when I need to build another marionette, I would pull the screw eyes out of, and that's why some of those puppets don't exist anymore, because I had to scavenge the parts. Because coming up with 15 cents or 35 cents to go buy a whole bag of screw eyes at that point was more than my allowance could bear. So I kept reusing the parts, but. It's fun to look at those first pieces and imagine, I guess I didn't know anything about that at that point. But I was actually surprised when I started to move it because he moves pretty well. He has a good center of gravity. The hands are pretty heavy. The feet are pretty heavy. And I had never really learned how to operate him in high school. He was done as an art project. So I was able to display him and, get an honorary mention at the high school art competition, but I had never really learned how to operate him as a marionette. So I kind of started out strongly as a builder and then took it from there.
Well, I know we're going to talk about a lot of the work you've done over the years with creatures, but when you were a kid, were you into creatures and monsters?
Oh, yeah. That was another thing my brother had is famous monsters from Filmland. So I always looked at those monster magazines. And when I was little, very little, they were hid away because I was going to have nightmares. So, but luckily, those nightmares turned into an income and a vocation. But yeah, I was into Rick Baker, Dick Smith. Stan Winston was just coming on the scene when I was in junior high and high school. So I was into monster makeup, and I thought, ooh, look, you can take a human being and you can put a mask on them, and then they can move it. So I very much it was a toss-up as a little kid whether I was going to be a monster maker or a puppeteer. And so I found a way to combine them.
Yeah. And when you were in school, I mean, you mentioned the building the marionette for the art show.
Yeah.
Did you take a lot of art classes in school?
I really excelled at art and music. I was not so good at book studying, and I still, when I read, I kind of veer off and I start to imagine building something or some other place. So art really pulled me in, and it gave me a focus. So I discovered very early on that in my history class, if I could build a marionette, then I could up my grade. So I think it was junior high, I built a Civil War soldier, probably only a foot tall, but my mom helped me make the costume, and that helped me get extra points. So my marionettes at this point, like I said, are still just objects to look at, more than being a performing thing. But I took every art class I could, and then I was in the marching band also. So learned a lot about group cooperation and counting to time, and a lot of those things have helped me throughout the years to be able to understand music and to count it out. And of course, I enjoyed my days in band with all my friends and learning to play a musical instrument. I played the clarinet in all the way through elementary school up through college. But it was a chance to express myself creatively, which for me, that really allowed me to excel.
And it was, I heard, I was watching an interview with you in college. You had a friend's mom who helped further your passion for puppetry. Is that right?
That's right. Well, she was actually the lady who lived across the street.
Okay.
As neighbors do, they come and go. And so all of a sudden, just across the street and over one door, ended up being Carolyn Layton. And she was starting her family. I guess she had one child and was getting ready to have another one. So she was staying at home. She had been a home ec teacher. So she was very skilled and was kind of looking for a little bit of creativity. And when we met, we started talking about projects and whatever. But she became my go-to person. My mom was good, and my mom could sew and stuff. But Carolyn could pattern, and she could talk about design. And she took me up to the next level. And I think my mom was a little relieved, maybe not totally. But then when Carolyn took over, it boosted everything up. I could take her to an idea, and she would emphasize it and make it just one step better. She built my clown costume, and she built several hand puppets and marionette. The cloth work, where I would do the sculpture and the hard parts and the casting, and then she would put the soft goods onto that kind of stuff. But yeah, I have reconnected with Carolyn, and we still stay in touch so many years later, because that was back in like 74, I think, when we met.
And did you learn tips and tricks from her that you still use today when you're building?
Yeah, I think, we went to the fabric store together, and at that point we were building like my clown costume, and she would say, well, we already have this piece, so let's take it with us so that we can match color patterns and we can pull from the shirt to make the pants, because we can buy a shirt cheap, but we don't have anything that looks like clown pants. So it was kind of the ability to shop creatively but constructively, so that you knew that your color palette would work together. And always just trying to make things one step better. She was kind of a person, when you're working with your family, you're a family member. But when you're working with an outsider, you have to present yourself professionally and be respectful of their time. And you need to kind of take your projects and move them through. So that kind of helped me at a young age, to see these things as assets and how I could use them. And, oh, hey, I'm borrowing somebody's time and they got a bunch of other stuff to do. Where it's your family, you're saying, hey, you're just watching TV. Here, help me with this. So, yeah, definitely. I've used little bits and pieces from her, along with just about everybody else I've ever worked with or alongside of. I love the learning process.
And was it through her that you got involved with the Puppeteers of America and the Los Angeles Guild?
Oh, that was a different woman.
Okay.
That was Mary Gallant Green.
Okay.
Mary had a puppet show in her garage. So I had never heard of anything like this. But when I was taking my college anatomy drawing class, I met a young boy there, and we were talking. I said, "Oh yeah, I like puppets, and they're fun, and I did some in high school." And he said, "Oh, my mom does puppet shows in her garage." And I said, "Oh, that's very interesting." He said, "You should meet her. She likes to meet puppeteers." I said, well, "I'd love to do that." So, we exchanged phone numbers, and a few days later we connected, and I got to go over and see her puppet show. It was hand puppets in a garage, and she had totally turned it into a birthday party space. There was like indoor, outdoor carpet on the ground in the garage. And then around the walls was a castellated set. So where she could pop up a hand puppet out of different doors. I think they were like cardboard tubes that she had used. And then somebody would go behind with a hand puppet and pop out. And then the hand puppet could sing happy birthday to the child. I never got to see any of the shows. But after I met Mary, I showed her some of the puppets that I did in high school. And she said, well, I will keep you in mind. The following day, I got a call from Magic Mountain. And Ernie Gooderjohn had contacted me and said, I'm thinking about doing a marionette show at Magic Mountain. Would you be interested in coming and showing me some of your stuff? And so it was just, like a hop and a skip from high school into working at Magic Mountain. I didn't know a whole lot, but I knew enough to get started. And there was a gentleman there who knew how to make molds and cast things. And so Paul taught me a lot about how to sculpt in clay a little bit better and how to make a plaster 2-part mold and a bunch of stuff like that. So that really got me off and running. So Mary, back to her, she said, well, okay, now that I've sent you along to Ernie and that turned out well, how about you help me be the registrar for the upcoming Puppet Festival. Oh, Puppet Festival. I want to know more about that. So I think that was in Lubbock, Texas. And Mary was the registrar, but I became the assistant. And through that, I was able to earn enough to pay for my, what would you call it, my fees there for the festival. So that offset that, I just had to get my money for the airfare. But I had my room and the festival covered. So she really helped me quite a bit over the first couple of years to get me connected with the LA Puppet Guild, Puppeteers of America, and several other organizations which were local and available. But until Mary introduced me to some of these other folks at the LA Puppet Guild, I didn't have a whole lot of professional puppet building experience. And immediately I met Frank Paris, who took me under his wing through the Puppeteers, the Los Angeles Guild of Puppetry. And he taught me a better quality sculpting clay and a better way to make molds. And so I'm kind of learning all this stuff simultaneously. But all of a sudden, I was opened up to a world of people that I could go to and say, I've seen this in a book. And I was confused about how this slotted joint works with a pin and how you decide how, all of a sudden these people could answer my questions and they could answer them with experience. And they'd say, well, let's go back one step and we'll make them this way. And I'll show you, why we put a metal tab in instead of a wooden one. And, but all of a sudden my world opened up to, from a hobby to a thing that I was actually, and it was, I think, a good point in my life for all this to happen because, I was trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life. I was in college. I was taking classes towards my degrees, not knowing what my degree was going to be, but had a chance to meet all these great professional puppeteers and to, by going to the festival, oh my goodness, to go from just seeing a few things on TV like Topo Gigio or Kermit or whatever was, on from time to time, all of a sudden there was full-blown theatrical productions up on stage with rotating sets and changing puppets and everything, hand puppets, marionettes, rod puppets, full-body character costumes, but in a story format. So over that week at the Lubbock Festival, I was just inundated with all these amazing people. And what a great group of warm and friendly people that were willing to share with me. It's like, oh, I really like this. This is amazing. So again, kind of another springboard and kind of a thing that pushed me ahead because I was so hungry for information, then all of a sudden there it was. I mean, the books opened up, the people opened up, and I was able to take that and run with it.
Now, I think I know the answer. I think you just answered this question, but I just wanted to be sure. In your opinion, are organizations like Puppeteers of America and local guilds good things for puppeteers to get involved with?
Absolutely. If you have any questions at all, there are so many people there that just have heads full of knowledge, have done many, many productions, have worked with many different materials and with people and worked across the country or from all around the world. So I just think it's a great social environment to be able to go and see shows and then either talk to the performer on stage or talk to other people about the performance you've just seen, or, hey, what are you up to? Or what do you do? Or so you're here at a puppetry event, it's kind of like what they call shooting fish in a barrel. It's easy to catch them, so you go up and you say, hey, you probably know something about puppetry. Let's talk about that. So if you're wanting to learn and you have some kind of inkling towards where you'd like to go, what a great environment. And I'm so glad that these societies were developed so many years ago that we have this asset to pull from. So yeah, I would highly recommend it. And even if you just want to be an audience member, we always need more people in the audience to come and enjoy what we're doing. And puppetry is a really magical art to me, and I hope to be able to share it with more people.
Excellent. Well, I want to get back to, I want to just jump back really quickly to Magic Mountain. What sort of puppets and things were you doing at Magic Mountain?
So I was brought into Magic Mountain as a member of the street theater program. We did line relief. We walked the midways, so I had my, at that point I had a walkabout puppet stage. So this was something that it was on a backpack frame that I wore, and that a Muppet style puppet would come up in front of a black screen that was in front of my face. So it kind of looked like a cabana from the beach where you would go and dress.
Right.
So it had stripes and it had kind of the opening in front, and I used this Muppet-style puppet, which had one human hand, and my other hand was up into his head. So I'd walk around as this character I called Dr. Blue Nose, and he would go and meet and greet with people and say, hey, where are you going? What's up? Can I help you get there? Oh, you're lost. Or the bathrooms are right over there, was probably a pretty common question. But a chance to walk around, and I could initiate a conversation, or I could just wait for them to come up. So a lot of times kids would just, you get 4 or 5 deep and they'd want to shake a hand and they'd be on their way. Or some kids would just stay there for half an hour and just talk to the puppet and ask the puppet how things were and what was his house and how did he carry it and why are those feet sticking out the bottom. And so that was one of my jobs. Now I would usually do that in the mornings. But in the afternoon, I would have art duties. So I would be working on the props for the other puppeteers, mimes, magicians, jugglers, helping to keep all that stuff together. And then the first year I was there, of course, we built The Mystery of the Missing Forest, which was a marionette show. And I built a frog marionette, which walked upright like a man. And there was some singing flowers and a tree that talked. And it's a very metaphysical journey about this frog who loses sight of everything because it goes dark. But then he realizes by bringing the light back or the sun coming up, then he was back on his journey. And so building puppets, doing molds, casting, taking care of all of the props was a great 3 years. And like I said, there was Paul Rayom, who was a mold maker. He had worked at places like Don Post Studios, where they made monster masks. And I was a big fan of the Don Post monster mask as a little boy. So just that he had worked there, to me, made him a celebrity. But he taught me how to do slip cast latex and how to do plaster molds. We used lots of plaster when I worked in his workshop. And so it was great because I could kind of develop and hone my skills as an artist. But I, unlike the other performers who were out and probably did 8 to 12 sets a day, I did a couple in the morning, and then I could do arts and crafts all day. So it was really, kind of the best of high school, getting to socialize and, get lots of young people and entertainers learning how to juggle. And of course, there was some magician working on cutting a rope and putting it back together, or there was a juggler trying to improve the 9-ball juggling and stuff. So I got to watch all that stuff, and being a big fan of street entertainers. And it was great to be able to watch all that and be part of the crowd.
And can you talk a little bit about because after being there for 3 years, you're sort of transitioned to television and film work?
Yeah, after I'd worked there for 3 years, I was starting to build a portfolio. And so with that portfolio, I was taking photos and adding to what I could show. When I first started there, I just had a couple of high school projects and a couple of elementary school things, so it was a pretty slim portfolio. But at Magic Mountain, I was able to build that portfolio so I had something to go and show around town. When I went to my friend Ernie and said, "Hey, I think it's time for me to move on from Magic Mountain," he said, "Great." And I thought, uh-oh, I was hoping they were going to give me a raise. You know, you kind of have that in the back of your mind. Maybe they're going to say, but he said, no, I think you're ready to move on. I think, you've got a lot of talent, and let's go get the yellow pages. So within, a few minutes of, that dreaded telling your boss you're giving your notice, he was writing up a letter of recommendation and then helping me to go look at places to work. And one of the first places I interviewed at was Tony Urbano Productions. I had seen Tony perform at Universal Studios when I was 10 years old. And I said, "Ooh, I know that name. He does amazing marionettes and beautiful shows." So I said, I'd like to, see if he could use some people. Okay, well, let's put that address on and I'll give you a copy of my letter of recommendation to you. Go ahead and write a cover letter. And he helped me flesh that out. And before long, I was over working at Tony Urbano Productions. And I knew a little bit about plaster and a little bit about sculpting and a little bit about costuming at that point. So I had a fair portfolio that I could show. And Tony brought me in not too long after that. And I think I worked there for on and off for about a year to really get me started. Of course, now Tony's marionettes were much better looking than the stuff that I was doing at Magic Mountain. So all of a sudden I was pushed a little bit higher as to what was expected of me and my creativity and my craft skills. So again, it was another studio where I could go and develop.
What sort of projects did you work on with Tony while you were working there?
Okay, so now when I went to work for Tony, I was trying to think the very first project we worked on, I think, was for Vegas. It was a TV show, and in this episode, the guy who was, I guess it was the murderer, was carving effigies of the people he was going to get, and he was putting them on his mantle. So for in this scene in this TV series, we had to create these figures that this guy was supposedly carving. So some of them were totally finished and painted, and a few of them were partially done. But these became evidence in this crime investigation and stuff. So I got to chip carve from a solid block of wood. Tony showed us how to draw the front and draw the side views and how to work towards bandsawing out the big chunks and then beginning to remark the things where maybe you'd cut off lines and put that stuff back on. So I think that was the very first project I worked on there. But we did stuff for Disney parades. We did a set of Siamese cat hand puppets from Lady and the Tramp. We did some stuff for McDonald's commercials. Tony was always working on his shows for Laguna, the Laguna Art Festival. So there was always some marionette being improved, being refurbished. New bits were always being designed and thought of. So Tony was always sketching stuff. So I got to look over Tony's shoulder when he would sketch the side and front of a puppet and see how he would line those up on brown paper so that we could, in the shop, take measurements off of that stuff and all end up with the same puppet at the end instead of everybody going 3 different directions or 4. So, a lot of sculpting, designing. Tony was always very literate and could describe stuff. So he always knew what he wanted. So for me, that was kind of different too, because this was the first time where I really had to make stuff for somebody else's artistic eye. So there was lots of communication, hey, now that you've done it this way, here's what I would like, and here's the reason that I would like it that way. And so developing as an artist, as part of a team instead of a solo artist. And I think I worked there for about a year and a half, maybe. And there was, lots of art. I mean, it was great. And then one of my favorite things at Tony's workshop is there was the wall of heads, which had probably 50 different marionette heads cast in celastic, which is a material which is nearly impossible to find anymore. But that's what I learned on. which was like a fabric that had a plastic particle to it. And if you dipped little squares of this fabric in acetone, then you could laminate them together almost like a paper mache. So there was this beautiful wall of all of these different character heads, many of which I had seen at Universal when I was a little boy, because Tony had a couple of different characters that he reused. And it was great to see all of those being represented on that wall. Of course, to me, it was like a candy store to just look across all of these different caricatures and think, oh, if I could really sculpt, then I could be making stuff that looks this good. And so I spent many, many years, learning to sculpt, and then being able to take stuff from paper and then put it, into a three-dimensional puppet where it could be put in front of camera was a skill that had to be developed and took, quite a few lessons and a lot of good teachers. When I was young, coming up and meeting people through the LA Puppet Guild, there was Rene and his artists, Bob Baker Marionettes, and Tony Urbano Productions. Well, we've lost Rene and Bob, and Tony is still there. And Tony has a lot of those great stories, that go back before I started, about different materials and coming through military service where it was hard to find materials and getting started and using those arts to get a footing and stuff. So I've known several people of that age group.
Recently on your Facebook page, you posted pictures from Uncle Andy's Funhouse, which was a TV show with Andy Kaufman. Can you talk a little bit about the puppets you did for that?
Right. Yeah, and that also was at Tony Urbano Productions. Projects would come and go, and we usually didn't have a whole lot of time to do them. So, Tony was very quick to draw on paper and stuff, working with Andy Kaufman. So I knew his name through comedy and stuff on TV. So I thought, oh, wow, that sounds like fun. Let's do that. Was not totally familiar with his Knuckles or Tony Clifton characters, but those are the two marionettes that we built. And so that might have been the second or third project that I did at Tony Urbano Productions. But I helped to carve, I think, shoes out of wood. Hands, I thought we were still building with wood filler over a wire armature. Bodies were, roughed out in a block of wood and then sanded and rounded. And then Tony, I remember on that one specifically, was teaching me how to take a sculpture from his drawing, from the pencil work, and then get it three-dimensionally onto a stand where it's just the head, but it looked like the drawing itself. And so that was, I would, merrily march along and grab the clay and start throwing it on. And then he said, just a second, let me show you some tricks. So he showed me how to take a manila paper cutout of the silhouette of the head. And so I could take this front silhouette and I'd push it up against the sculpture till it was deep enough in. And then I'd say, oh, look, the nose that I'm sculpting is too low. So I need to take it up a little bit. Oh, look, the brow is not in the right place. Now, when you're young and you're starting out, you say, well, the brow is about halfway and the lips are about a third. So you take all these things and you begin to put them together. But now that you're looking at a very specific caricature and one that has been approved by the director and the star, you don't want to veer from that. And I think part of that is artistic, but part of that is also a necessity in business of building puppets. Once you get something signed off on, you don't want to keep reinventing it. You want to show them what they've said they want, and then you can make suggestions and go from there. I mean, sometimes you can go totally crazy and give them a second version, but usually what you wanted to do was be able to match something from a drawing and say, okay, this is what we were all talking about. We all looked at the drawing. We liked it. We approved the fabric samples. We approved the look. Here it is, three-dimensional. And if they're going, well, it doesn't look like the drawing, we don't want to pay for that. Well, you can say, well, here it is. Here's the drawing. Here's the puppet. It very well matches. And that's what you're paying, is for us to build the puppet that you've already approved. So a lot of fun and great lessons there on being able to be an artist for hire, which was new to me.
Yeah. Well, I want to jump ahead just a tiny bit here and, of course, talk about Ghostbusters. You have said that one of your most challenging puppets that you've worked on was the librarian ghost for Ghostbusters. Can you tell us a little bit about the challenges you faced there?
Yeah, that was, So it wasn't very many years after I was working for Tony. I think I did 2 B monster movies, and then I was on to Ghostbusters. So, I mean, this is just, so quick. But I was learning stuff on every project. And at this point, I have a little bit of understanding of puppet rigging, stringing marionettes, different types of fasteners and stuff like that. And that's kind of how I got started on the librarian ghost. Since I was able to show in my portfolio simple mechanisms and stuff like that, when I started on Ghostbusters, Steve Johnson had me build a mock-up of the librarian. At that point, they had some foam latex skins, which they were able to give to me to cut and glue. And these were all based off of the original actress's form. So they did life casts off of her, cleaned up those clay sculptures, created molds, and then created foam latex skins. So one day, these foam latex skins ended up on my workbench, and Steve and I worked on how long these arms were supposed to stretch, how far the head was supposed to collapse, the eyes were supposed to pull in. Steve had all kinds of information for me, and I would take little bits, and then I would start building those together into a simple mock-up. So I started out with a PVC pipe, 2x2 lumber, drywall screws, and I would stick these things up inside of the form, this foam latex skin, and we would stretch it as far as we could. Once we'd have a chance to look at the thing together, then Steve would advise me, well, a little farther, a little shorter, a little wider, a little taller. And then I would pull the stuff out of the foam latex skin, trim it up, stick it back in. So that was my first part of that project, was to create this mock-up. That mock-up was then sent over to John Alberti and his father, who were doing the mechanism, and they were off-site. They weren't actually working in the Boss Films studio. So I'd take a drive up to North Hollywood with this shape, and then I would show it to John, and then we would talk math. He'd say, okay, well, I see here that this arm in relaxed stage is 18 inches long, but now it's 22. So you want that much stretch? Yeah, I need that much stretch. Okay. Here we're going to go to the head. Now I see that it pulls down. We could put a parallelogram in the neck. John Alberti and his father created this wood mechanism. The arms actually were made out of like oak. I think that they had pared down to like a 1/4 inch by 1/2 inch. And then there was pieces of thin ply that they would put on the outside. So mainly the interior of the librarian ghost was wood, which I think would surprise most people. A lot of people call her an animatronic, and she actually had no power. She was not plugged in. She had no computers. There was no chips. There was no light bulbs, no servos, no nothing. She was basically bicycle cables. And those cables were hooked up to 2 big controllers. Each controller had 2 handles. And each one of those handles had several different notches where I could put a cable. And so the farther away from the pivot, the farther the cable would pull. And so I could actually take these things, and I kind of made it akin to an old-time phone operator plugging these different cables in and trying them and unplugging them. On each one of those handles, there was 4 or 5 different cables. So one handle you pulled might lower the head, pull the eyes in, and raise the torso. And another handle might bring the crest of the skull down, pull the nose back, and pull the fabric or the foam into the creases in the rib cage. So it was all about trial and error. And all of this time I was working with Steve, and he would be giving me feedback. So it was many, many weeks of coming up with ways to attach a string to a piece of foam latex and pull it so it didn't look like it was being pulled from a very specific point. So I came up with several different series of buttons with a post on the back, things that I could tie to and glue on and unglue. A lot of that stuff was reinforced with spandex, and just a chance to getting all of those bits and pieces to do what we needed to do so that it would just happen in that moment. And I think I had said maybe it was 24 seconds. It's probably like 24 frames. So it's actually part of a second, So all of that work was so that when we lined it up with the photography of the actress and she starts to move up, well, then the arms of the librarian ghost puppet, the head and all of that stuff needs to continue forward. So all of that was lined up in the camera so that we could repeat it. And we probably didn't do that many takes. I don't know if we did 10 takes total over 2 days in order to get her to be quick enough and for all of the fabric to be blown with the air hoses. And I think some of the fabric was pulled off with monofilament. So there's several different layers, but we try to make it as simple as possible so that when we move those triggers that she basically transformed and got to the right endpoint, and then we could reset her and then go again. So yeah, quite a few weeks for just a few frames in a film.
Well, it's amazing, and it's one of the iconic. There's so many iconic things in that film, but definitely one of the iconic pieces. And another iconic piece, of course, is Slimer, and you were Slimer. And I heard you talk about your time working and building stuff for Ghostbusters, saying that you felt that everything you worked on was an audition to get the part of Slimer.
Yeah, because actually. It really took everything that I had learned up to that date to be able to pull this job off. I knew a little bit about character costume construction, a little bit about rigging and wrangling and all that. So when I was brought into Ghostbusters, when things were coming together, such as the Terror Dog, I was one of the first people that would go inside of it and say, hey, I think the handles are too far away, or I think it's too heavy here and it doesn't bend well enough here. And then there was a crew of people that would go about doing that stuff. And then I would go back to my projects. But as soon as something would be developed, they would say, hey, Mark, come try this out. And so I would get a chance to climb inside the Terror Dog and make it come to life. Same with, every time I would hold something, in hindsight, definitely, when I was operating any of the cables or the puppets and trying to bring them to life, that I was showing the people who were making decisions who got to do the performances and stuff. So if I was working on the librarian ghost, then I was working on her movements and how she looked when she came to life. And the same with the Terror Dogs. Now I was in one of the Terror Dogs when it was in the Gozer's Temple set. And when she reaches over and pets the dog on the head in the long shot, I'm actually inside of that dog. My waist and legs are under the set, but from navel up, I'm inside of the Terror Dog, and my hands are up to the head to where I could turn the head left or right. And if I would lean down, the Terror Dog would crouch down on its knees so it could lower the front of the body, and I could turn the head left and right. So I actually got to be in, the Terror Dog for a shot. So all of the stuff that I was doing, and of course that was shot before Christmas. We'd, I think, been on the project for a couple of months. The Terror Dog shot was one of the first on-set effects that we had to have available for shooting. So that dog, actually, if you look at it in the close-up, has a mouthful of teeth, which was shot many, many, many months later. But the one I was in actually has no teeth because at that point we were under a crunch just to get something in front of cameras that could hold up to a long shot. So even, I had already done some stuff that was in the film that people could look at. I was a bit of a pest, and rightly so. I kept saying, I know you think you have somebody else that you want to do Slimer, but I'm right here. I can do it. I can build the costume to wear. You've seen my performance. I can do the performance. Oh, no. We have somebody else we're going to use. And so that went on for many, many months. Of course, as time got crunched and budgets got used up, they said, well, Mark Wilson is right here, and the other person we'd have to bring out, and house and pay for all those additional expenses. So one day, Steve Johnson came to me and said, guess what? You're going to be Slimer. And I was like, oh, thank you, because I really wanted to perform and build, and not just to be a builder. So it was great to be able to, as I was working and developing stuff, that I could show them, how I could bring it to life and stuff. And I think just building a good work relationship with my bosses and pulling a lot of different rabbits out of the hat, along the ways to get the projects done, and working late hours, pretty soon they kind of, I don't think they felt they owed me anything, but they felt I could do the job. So all the way through, I was trying to prove to them, hey, I want that. There's one other suit. I knew who was going to be in the Marshmallow Man, but I know Slimer. That performer has not been life cast. and the sculptures haven't been started. So I was the squeaky wheel, and I kept letting him know, hey, I can do it, I can do it, I can do it, I can do it. And I think I got told more than once, leave me alone. You're not going to do it. But when you're in the building, that really improves your chances. You're not that voice on the phone. You can continue to show them what you can do and stuff. So one day, shortly after I was told I had received the role and I was going to be Slimer, a full body life cast was done, including my head and my arms, down, I think, almost to my knees. Now in the Slimer costume, I just wore a black skirt and my legs hung below, and we shot everything against black. So it wasn't necessary to have a blue screen or green screen outfit, because Slimer is translucent, so you can see the backgrounds through him. So he wasn't traditionally matted in, but he was shot against black, and then somehow that was double exposed into the film so that you could see all of the stuff behind him because he's a ghost.
Yeah, well, it's did you have any idea at the time that Slimer would become the cultural icon that he has become today?
No, and it's actually taken quite a few years for that to happen. And thank you for the internet for coming along, and Facebook and all that other stuff. But yeah, for about 20 years after I did the stuff, that nobody ever asked for an autograph or, oh, you're the guy that was in that character. So even, I know he was popular for many years, but definitely not when we were doing them. We would see dailies as we would shoot our scene. He's at the food cart or he's eating hot dogs and whatever. But luckily we worked at the effects house, the Boss Films Corporation, and we were able to review dailies at a building just around the corner from the ghost shop, where they had all of the optical equipment, stuff for compositing, putting together the blue screen shots, whatever else we were doing. So it was funny. We thought we were doing a good job. We made ourselves laugh, but no way did we know, oh, hey, 30 years from now, we're going to look back at this day and say, wow, wasn't that great? We knew exactly where we were headed. It was, all of his takes were done at different camera speeds. So, I could do something pretty funny, but then when you speed it up, it's even funnier. So dailies were really a treat. And we really enjoyed watching him come from maquettes up through the full-size sculptures into a costume which could be worn and danced around. So we knew we had something pretty cool. And we were excited to be on a project with Dan Aykroyd and Bill Murray, who I definitely knew from Saturday Night Live. But then when you put it together with Ivan Reitman and the entire cast, and that that script had to be honed and stuff, I think pretty much the script that we had when we started was pretty much what it ended up with. There were some slight variations, but I know years before that it had gone through several major reworks. So, Slimer, when we worked on him, was called Onion Head. So Slimer, the name came along, I think, through the animation series or something, when he was kind of a sidekick and not so much of a target. In the first movie, they're just shooting at him and he's running, which I thought was a real fun character to play, because it's, you don't notice anybody. You're just relaxing. You're just doing your thing. You're gobbling up all the food. Whoa, wait, attack, run, jump, hide, twist. So it was kind of a fun character with not a lot of deep thought to him, other than escape, run, flee, and then, of course, gobbling up everything you could find in sight. So a great character, but we had no idea. We were breaking new ground because we were doing foam latex, full body character costumes, I think, and horror kind of stuff, but as a comedy. Because before that, it had been like American Werewolf in London was the most recent, I think, and Star Wars, the cantina scenes and stuff like that. So we had really created something pretty cool, but no idea that it was going to have the lasting power. And, what is this, 35 years later, then I'm a mini celebrity. So that's really kind of cool.
Yeah.
I highly recommend it. If you want to do an iconic character, go for it.
Yeah. Well, I want to. I mean, you've worked on so many things, and we don't have time to talk about absolutely everything. But I want to skip ahead a little bit to Beetlejuice, and I heard you tell a story about puppeteering the fly from Beetlejuice, and how the fly became very delicate as the shooting went on. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, the fly was about the size of a Nerf football, and then there was a miniature set, but it was oversized so that the fly looked correct in scale. And he was also shot, I think, at 4 frames a second, so that he's very sped up. and he was a rod puppet. So my job, I was all dressed in black, had a black hood, a black shirt, black gloves, and I could actually be in frame because they would just key out all those blacks and they don't really show up. But I had to support the weight of the fly. Now, the fly didn't weigh very much, just a few pounds. But when he would set down on his legs, the first couple of times it was fine and we could reposition him, but there was a piece of 16th inch armature wire, which is okay for building large curves and building armatures for sculptures. But this little tiny area, about 1/8 of an inch long, was where his knee could bend. So you'd bend that wire about a half a dozen times and it would give out. So they ended up super gluing the legs back on at the knee joints. And that became somebody's job to make sure that his legs were glued on right before every single take. But if I would take the fly, he's on this rod, so I would have to pick him up. The guy who was puppeteering the wings would make those flutter, and then I would set him back down. If I would put any of the pressure down on the body, then a leg would pop off because it was just a tiny, tiny area of super glue, maybe not even 1/8 of an inch across. So it was kind of a brittle joint. So when I would move him from place to place, I couldn't actually set him down. So when he flies from one hill to another, I'm actually holding him about 1/8 of an inch off of the surface or just barely touching it to get that. So it's not just bringing him to life, but I also had to be mindful of, okay, if I set him down and another leg pops up, then we got to wait and get that glued. It's got to set. Then we'll get back into groove. And as a performer, you want to be able to do it a couple of times in a row. So you say, hey, I'm going from A to B. I'm going from A to B. I'm going from A to B. And then they're filming all of these takes side by side. Instead of I'm going from A to, oops, I didn't make it to B. Okay, stop. Let's glue it back together. So it was just a minor thing, but you don't realize, I think, people who haven't done puppetry, especially in a high pressure thing like film. It's a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed my career, but there's 10 people standing around. And if you set it down again and that leg goes popping off, everybody looks at you. And I wanted them to look at me because I was doing a good job, not because I was, holding the puppet missing 3 legs. So,
right.
It was really a great character. And Tim Burton, actually, I think it was the second or third day, we got the word from set that Tim was extremely happy, thought the fly looked amazing on film. And so that's one of those little, when it's hard to get through a day, I said, well, Tim Burton liked what I did, so I guess I'm okay. I'll continue doing puppetry.
For another day, I will.
Yes, at least.
Yeah. Well, also in Beetlejuice, you were the hands and legs of Harry the Headhunter as well, right?
Yeah, Harry the Shrunken-Headed Hunter. Yeah. That was a cool gag, and that was actually added after the film was done. That was one of those where you go in for a reshoot. And since I had, once again, done pretty well on set, they liked my work, then Bob Short, who was in charge of the project, said, hey, Mark's about the right size. Let's bring him in. So I went into wardrobe, and they fit me with the safari outfit. They took the pants and the shirt, and then we knew that we were going to have to cut into the elbows of the shirt to stick my arms through. And so I laid on my back with my head through the wall and watched everything on a monitor. And then the torso was set on my chest, and Bob Short turned the head and moved the eyes for Harry. And so it was my job to, of course, give life to the lower half of the body. When Michael Keaton was there and he came on the set, I was already tucked into set and with my head behind it. So I didn't really get to meet him. But we got to act knee to knee. And so I would watch on the monitor behind the wall. When Michael would look over me, I would try to act pensive and pull back just a little bit and keep the hands just alive and pull the hat or whatever. So, yes, I'm the lower half of Harry the Shrunken-Headed Hunter. And they did 2 different endings, and that was the one they chose. The other one was the barber ends up talking to Beetlejuice until it drives him nuts about, I'm going to cut that long hair. I'm going to cut his hair off quicker than anything. So we had 2 choices, and I was in both of them. But they ended up with the one with the witch doctor, which I think was really the best choice.
You also, in 1991, you worked on the movie Hook, and you built a marionette of Julia Roberts as Tinkerbell, right?
Yeah, it was. I was called to put this marionette together. They needed it to glow out through the limbs. So it was cast in acrylic, and it had 3 100-watt light bulbs in the torso. And so the leads came up through the marionette control, and I ran that off to a 12-volt power supply. We put together, I guess she's just probably under a foot. She's very tiny, maybe even 9 inches. This marionette that could be flown next to Robin Williams' face or across when you couldn't see that it was Julia Roberts. So it's kind of a glow with arms and legs. And then, so I got a chance to work on Hook, and remember some days where I was there and Dustin Hoffman really was into directing. And so he would run up to the monitor and him and Steven would talk about stuff. And then there I was holding Tinkerbell on a marionette controller. Also got a chance to meet Robin Williams, who was just a lovely guy. He was very complimentary, and even when it was hard and things, because I was kind of brought in because they weren't happy with what was happening first. So they said, here, here's what we have. We want you to improve it. So there was not enough time by any means. I think in a couple of weeks, I had to have that marionette on stage. And so I did a resculpts. I actually had Dan Platt do the sculpts so they looked just like Julia Roberts. And then I cut that apart and then created arms which were slightly bent and gave her kind of a flying position, and then took out as many joints as I could. So she's just jointed at the shoulders, hips and knees, I think, and a little bit of neck, but got rid of elbows, ankles, and other things, just so it was a very simple marionette. But yeah, really a beautiful little acrylic. And then over the light bulbs, we had little test tubes that we had custom stained to give it kind of an amber glow so she wasn't so bright white. So it was a lot of little trial and error. And I had Doug Beswick. I used his shop. Doug had hired me for a bunch of stuff up to that point. So when I had a chance to return the favor, I took the Hook project over to him. They also did a cable-controlled version of the same puppet, which was in a lamp or something from a few shots, and I wasn't as successful as we had hoped it would be, because you have a little 6 or 9 inch tall cable operated puppets, and everything is the controller doesn't work. All of a sudden, the arm moves a big move and stuff. So it was hard to get her to be real subtle and lifelike. I think we did a lot better on the marionette.
Well, it's interesting how the sometimes simpler makes a better performance. A simple marionette on strings can sometimes win out over a cable-controlled puppet.
Sure, yeah, and I think that we put a lot more hours into that cable-controlled puppet to get it to turn the head, turn the waist, raise the arms, kick a knee and stuff. And I think at the end of the day, that little marionette really got a lot of work.
Yeah.
So it was great to see her in the film. And I puppeteered it on a bunch of stuff, and then ended up moving on to some other projects.
Well, this is the Puppetry Podcast, so I absolutely have to ask about MuppetVision 3D. How did you get a job working on MuppetVision 3D?
I sent tapes and resumes to the Hensons for about 10 years. Was kind of how you start that story. Back in New York, and one day I got a call on the phone. And said, "Hi, we'd like to have you audition for something for the Hensons." And I thought, well, but I'm in North Hollywood and you're in New York. How's this going to work? They said, "Oh, no. We are auditioning at the Debbie Reynolds Dance Studio in North Hollywood." So literally about less than 10 minutes from my front door. A couple of days later, I went and auditioned at this dance studio. And they had us pick up a Muppet in the first room, which had mirrors on it, and they said, "Go ahead and get warmed up, and in a few minutes we'll call you in as a group." Okay, so there's 5 or 6 people. We grab our Muppet off the table, all kind of generic stuff, no Kermits or Statler and Waldorf or anything, but a lot of generic Muppets. And I found one that I liked and put it on and worked to the mirror. And about 10 minutes later, they said, "Okay, it's time for the group to come in." And so I, along with the other people that were in the room, were pulled into the second room. And this was a much bigger room, and it's got mirrors all along one full wall. And along that is this dais of folding tables. And I see several Muppeteers who I knew. But Bryan Henson is actually our performance partner. So he's got a Muppet, and he brings us in and says, okay, everybody sit down. And there's a row of chairs that faces these tables. And he gives us the basic of, again, we're going to do an ad-lib scene. So get ready. And each one of these scenes is going to be different, so you don't have to connect it to the last person. And we would like you to prepare to be funny, because we want to see what you can do as a puppeteer. We want to check your lip sync, of course. Can you keep the Muppet at the right level? We were working to a video camera, and so all of this was being recorded so they could refer to it. And I believe also the people up at the table had a chance to look at the monitor also to see how we could frame ourselves and look good on camera. So I had a little experience, but not a lot. But I had done that walkabout puppet stage back at Magic Mountain, so I had lots of lip sync and working with a Muppet. And so these were hand and rod puppets, I believe. So, like I said, there's, Bryan Henson, who I knew was our performance partner. He had another Muppet on. And up at the table, just a few people that I knew, but there was a couple of chairs that were empty. So the first person got up. I think I'm third in line. First person gets up, does their bit with Bryan. Okay, hey, a little applause. They sits back down. Second person gets up. Just then, Jim Henson walks in and sits down right across from me. And I'm going, oh, my goodness, it's Jim Henson. And he's right there. And he's looking at me. This is horrible. This is terrible. Oh, wait a minute. This is the best possible opportunity I could have in my entire life. Jim Henson is right here in the room. So I took that to heart. And I thought, I'm going to show off. I'm going to have fun. This is great. I'm just going to play with a puppet. And so I felt very alive. And I felt very energized, actually, by this amazing puppeteer who I had seen, hundreds of hours of his work by that point, was there to review and watch. And as I'm performing, I think Bryan and I start talking about, hey, let's get this stuff out of this room before anybody comes back. It was kind of, a room was going through some remodeling, so there was some fluorescent fixtures in the background and some furniture pads and some tables and stuff. And so we just start working this bit about, okay, there's no way we're going to be able to get the table under our jackets. How are we going to get this out of here? And I look over and Jim's laughing. And I thought, oh, this is amazing. What a great memory that Jim had a chance to watch and to review my performance live and right there. A day later, I got a call and I actually got the job. I got not a call back, but, yeah, it's Friday, I think, and on Monday we would like you to be over at the Disney Studios, and we need to start working you puppeteers in some of these group scenes. And I was on. I had my contracts and met several other puppeteers. I think there was about 20 of us hired out of, I think it was 350 that were auditioned in L.A. And they were trying to find locals so they didn't have to pay for their upkeep and stuff. So I was lucky that I lived in North Hollywood and I had a chance to audition. And then we shot for about a week. I think we had a couple of days of warm up. They had some small world characters. They had some marching, what don't you call them, marching band members or something. They were racked together four on a platform that we rolled around. So we would just rehearse each one of those bits, and some of the other Muppeteers would help us choreograph and get things worked out. And then working out just different bits. One of the bits that I was actually standing next to Joe Self, who was another puppeteer just about my age, and so we came up about the same time. But we needed to get the trombone slides to go in. Both of us had a trombone playing hand puppet. But trying to get those slides to go parallel into, because this was a 3D film, just the right moment, they were always a little off. And so Joe and I talked for a few seconds after we had a couple of unsuccessful takes, and everything else was working, but those trombone slides were not parallel at all. They were coming out at different angles. I said, tell you what, if one of us holds both puppets and one of us does both trombone slides, I think we can do this. And so we kind of thought about it, and we said, yeah, that's a much better way to do it. And then it's not two performers, it's one performer doing both puppets and one person doing the slides. And so the next take, we nailed it, and I think we did 3 takes after that. But from that point on, we had figured out how to get puppeted trombone slides to be parallel and go right into the camera. So it was a great experience. I mean, I was really thrilled to be there on the Disney lot, which is a beautiful movie lot. It's like a campus, a college campus from the 50s or something, nice and clean and manicured. And then to be in a soundstage playing with a bunch of puppeteers along with Jim Henson and the other Muppet performers was pretty mind-boggling, you know.
Yeah, and it's in my opinion anyway, MuppetVision 3D is like one of the greatest Muppet things ever done. You know, in my opinion, the jokes and the puppetry and everything really stands up, and it's just a wonderful experience. So, just I'm totally impressed that you got to be a part of that. I'm totally fanning out about it because it really is such an amazing. It is an amazing piece of Muppet history.
Yeah, it was lovely. And just one day we were there, and Jim was goofing off, and he kind of came over to talk to us, kind of group of puppeteers that were working on our choreography. And one of the guys had brought in a unicycle. So Jim he says, "Hey, can I try that?" And Don said, "Yeah, go ahead. Jump on, Jim." So Jim took about 5 pedals across the floor. I guess maybe he had some experience, but the unicycle went flying out from under him, and he stopped, caught himself on his feet. He says, "I think you guys probably all want to continue working, and maybe I'd better not try this unicycle anymore." And he giggled, and he had a good time, and we were all, "Oh, good, we're so glad he didn't fall."
Yeah. Well, you were the puppet master for Team America, and can you talk a little bit about what your job on that film entailed?
I was responsible for all the puppets that were on set in front of camera. So there was an entire team headed up by Frank Langley that were being rigged and wrangled, ready to go onto set. But it was my job to be on set and make sure that I had what I needed and that it was in good working order. So I had on a headset, and many of the puppeteers, if they were up in cherry pickers or if they were under the floor doing rod puppets of those same marionettes, they were operated different ways for different scenes. Then I would have to go fix a string or get one of my crew members to go in. We'd work together with the wardrobe to make sure that if a string got broke or whatever, that we could get back in through the pants leg and take a nice long 6-inch sewing needle to get the thread back up through the knee and up to the controller, maybe up to a puppeteer who's 20 feet in the air, 15 feet. So it was all about knowing the next shot, making sure that I had the puppets on hand, which was a bit of a dance. We would get up in the morning, puppets would have been rigged through the night on 15-foot strings, and then Trey and Matt would say, "Oh, we're going to do a close-up, so we just need all 5 of those puppets, but we want them on short strings." And so all the they could get wound up or they get cut off and replaced. So it was just trying to, stay ahead of all that stuff and keep all of the puppets working. I had a lot of the things I don't do, a lot of electronics and stuff. So there were people who specifically did that. If the heads would stop working or the eyes would start twitching or something, then I would hand that stuff off or call on the right person or the right expert. But I was right there working for the Kyoto brothers to make sure that all of those puppets were looking good on camera.
Well, you talk about important puppet films. I think Team America is certainly one of those that even today people still talk about. So it's, again, another piece of amazing puppet work that you've got to work on.
Sure. Another thing that I did on Team America, too, is I built the camels. So in the Cairo street scenes, there was 3 camels that are either kneeling or walking. And so that was my building project before we went to set. That I was in charge of putting together those 3 camels. Worked heavily with Norman Tempia and Joanne Bloomfield. Joanne did the coverings, and Norman was kind of an overall art director, and he did all the flocking and stuff. But I did the sculpting, the major forms, and figuring out how they were to be operated. So that was great to see them on screen. And actually, I've ended up in my collection to have one of the Team America kneeling camels. So the legs just have armature wires in them, but the neck is marionettable. I don't know if that's a real word. But you could, it's got a slinky that goes up through the neck with a foam rubber core. So I still have, I was lucky enough to get one of the puppets from a film, because quite often on the projects that I work on, those puppets get stuck into a crate and are tucked away. A lot of the Team America props and puppets, they ended up selling in auction. So I was able to get a Team America camel that I actually helped design and build as part of my personal puppet collection.
Oh, that is awesome. I wanted to ask about building, and this is sort of just a general question, but I find that the case is that a lot of times builders who build the puppets or creatures also get to perform them. Have you found that your building has also led to getting the performing work as well?
It's a little bit of a toss-up. I've had good and bad experiences both ways. Mostly my career, I've been very, very happy with where I've ended up on the projects. I have a few things like on Beetlejuice. I wasn't originally a builder. I was brought in as a performer. So then that gave me a chance to continue to do that. I kept trying to head my career towards just performing because a good residual performance can tide you over for many, many years. Where building, once you're done building, that check stops. So I found out through performing that I could keep my pension and health paid and stay under my SAG contracts and stuff. But sometimes, because I was a builder, I would get left behind in the shop when other people would go on to perform. And sometimes they would audition other performers because they wanted them specifically to be available. On a few shows such as Ghostbusters, it was important to have the regular builder on set. And of course, with Slimer, I was inside, so I couldn't do any gluing or fiddling once I was in. And then there were some projects where I only got to build and did not get to perform at all. And that was always a bit of a heartache because I really, most of all, enjoyed building puppets that I could then perform, where I knew them inside and out. I helped develop them so that they would come to life on camera, and then to bring them to life on camera and see that performance all edited in. So I don't know that I would tell anybody not to do one thing. I do have some friends who are performers that, even though they're talented artists, don't like others to know that because they're afraid that they won't get more calls to be a performer. But I think it's all kind of evened out for me, and I enjoy wearing both hats.
Well, Mark, you've worked on so many amazing projects over the years, and you've got to do so many, as we talked about, iconic roles. What has been the highlight of your career so far?
Well, I would have to say Ghostbusters, but I think that's an easy question. I knew it was a long-term project. I think we were on it 6, 8 months, something like that, maybe even 9. So I got to make a lot of really good friends who are still, friends with today. And also the amount of work, the high profile that it is today. So it was really fun to work on. And then it's always fun to review and watch again, and to continually get praise at this point in my life from people who saw it well after it was made and maybe even weren't born until many years later. People in their teens and 20s now who are coming up and being fans. And it really warms my heart when I see little kids wearing their Ghostbusters outfits and playing the game. Hey, I'm strong and I can chase the ghosts away. I can be powerful. That's really great. So it's very heartwarming, and it's so fun to be in a big crew like that. I think there was probably 20, 30, 40 of us, maybe 60 total at Boss Films, between all the camera grip, special effects, puppet builders, and all that stuff. So to be into a big environment like that with so many talented people on so many different levels was just, mind-boggling, And then one of the great things, again, about Boss that I had mentioned is since they had their own screening room, we could build stuff, we would get it shot, we would see it the following day and get to review the footage with all the different departments. And so if we were shooting Slimer, not only were we looking at, do we have the clip we need, but we were hearing conversations about grain density and are we going to be able to pin block that and move it across frame, and how are we going to get that to work and on other stuff with the flames to get them to be at the right moment, or to working on effects. So I felt that was very much akin to getting paid to go to college. And my favorite, I don't have a degree in puppetry. I know you can get them. But at that point, there just really wasn't much offered unless I went across the United States. So to get my education in Hollywood in front of the camera at an amazing special effects house can't be beat.
Well, if people want to connect with you online, where can they go?
They can go to my website. I'm at www.markbryanwilson.com. That's MarkBryanWilson. Now, that's probably the easiest. And then my email is there, or I frequent on Facebook. So look for Mark Bryan Wilson on Facebook. And I'm also on Instagram and Twitter, but not as much. So I am trying to reach out more on all my social media. So, stop by and say hi. I do get quite a few emails and requests during a week. So if it takes me a little bit of time to get back to you, I will get back to you.
Excellent. Well, I'll have a link to all of that in the show notes so people can get to it easily. But Mark, I just thank you so much for taking the time and talking to us today here on the show.
Thank you. It's been fun to talk about puppetry. It's my passion, and I hope that maybe a little bit of that rubbed off to the audience.
I think it definitely did. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you.
Many thanks to Mark Bryan Wilson for taking the time to be on the show. For links to Mark's website, as well as to some of the other things we discussed, check out the show notes for this episode number 43, over at underthepuppet.com. Well, now it's time to announce the winner of episode 41's giveaway for a Funko Pop of Sesame Street's Count Von Count, autographed by the Count and puppeteer Matt Vogel. Okay, the question was, David Stevens' show Pied Picker is based on the tale of the Pied Piper. What creatures take the place of rats in David's story? And the correct answer is cockroaches. And the winner is Alyssa Amy. Congratulations, Alyssa. Your Funko Pop is on the way. And thank you to everyone who entered. Well, now it's time for this episode's giveaway, and since it was so much fun to give away an autographed Funko Pop last time, let's do another one. This time, a signed Sesame Street Snuffleupagus Funko Pop, signed by puppeteer Martin P. Robinson. This awesome and totally not imaginary prize can be yours if you can answer this question from the episode you just listened to. What name did Mark Bryan Wilson give the Muppet-style puppet he used while working at Magic Mountain early in his career? When you find the answer, send it in an email to underthepuppet@gmail.com with the subject line giveaway, and you'll be entered to win. All entries for this giveaway must be received by May 15th, 2020. The winner will be chosen at random from all correct entries and be announced on the June 1st, 2020 episode of the show. Good luck! Well, that's going to do it for this episode of Under the Puppet. If you have feedback, you can send it via email to underthepuppet@gmail.com, or you can connect with the show on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram by searching for Under the Puppet. That's going to do it for this time. I'll talk to you next time. This episode of Under the Puppet featured music by Dan Ring and was edited by Steven Staver. Under the Puppet is a production of Saturday Morning Media and made possible by the Saturday Morning Media Patreon patrons who've gone to patreon.com/Saturday Morning Media and set up a monthly pledge for as little as $1 a month. Patrons get new episodes before they are released, behind-the-scenes information, and exclusive bonus episodes. If you'd like to support this show and the other fun content from Saturday Morning Media, become a patron. Head on over to patreon.com/Saturday Morning Media and set up your monthly pledge today. You can also tell a friend about the show or leave the show a review on Apple Podcasts. Thank you so much for listening. Under the Puppet is copyright 2020 Saturday Morning Media, Grant Bachogo executive producer, all rights reserved. www.saturdaymorningmedia.com. The new Under the Puppet app is here for iOS and Android, and it is absolutely free. Download it today to get all the episodes of Under the Puppet in one place. Plus, you'll hear new episodes before their release, get exclusive bonus episodes, and more. Just search for Under the Puppet in the Apple App Store for iOS or on Google Play. You can also visit SaturdayMorningMedia.com/apps for direct links. The free Under the Puppet app for iOS and Android. Download it today. You've been listening to Saturday Morning Media. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.